numerous updates are emerging from the Avdiivka sector. In this area, Russian troops are advancing along three distinct axes. Despite significant activities in the northern zone, it's incorrect to assume the south remains calm. In fact, the southern region has experienced even more intense combat in certain aspects. The strategies employed by Ukrainian and Russian forces in the south markedly differ from those observed in the north. Once Russian control over Terikon was established, Ukrainian soldiers noted the Russians began prioritizing infantry over tanks, contrasting the early offensive stages. This shift away from heavy machinery is attributed to two main reasons. Primarily, currently, numerous updates are emerging from the Avdiivka sector, necessitating tanks and armored vehicles to traverse over 10 kilometers to the front line. Often, this distance allows Ukrainian drone operators to spot and attack these units. Ukrainian forces reported significant damage or destruction to over half of these tanks and vehicles before reaching their intended targets. Consequently, logistical constraints and Ukrainian artillery and drone attacks have compelled Russians to reduce their reliance on heavy equipment. Secondly, the shift of the front lines towards railways, Terikon, and water reservoirs complicated the use of tanks and armored vehicles due to the terrain. Ukrainian scouts report that Russians now deploy armored personnel carriers for transporting infantry to Krasnohorivka, and upon reaching the village, Russian troops proceed on foot to the battle line. In contrast, the southern region's dynamics differ significantly, with every offensive incorporating heavy armor support. The Russians, having a direct route to Donetsk, face fewer logistical hurdles here. Other than occasional mishaps on narrow bridges, the terrain, predominantly open fields, presents no significant barriers. However, this openness leaves Russian assault units vulnerable to Ukrainian drones. A recent video from Ukraine's 53rd Mechanized Brigade showcases a Russian convoy of at least 8 tanks and armored vehicles being detected early and heavily bombarded near Vodian. This area now resembles a vast graveyard of Russian machinery. This particular convoy was less fortunate, being annihilated before even reaching its destination. However, Ukrainian minefields remain the primary challenge for Russian troops. While some enemy units exploit morning fog to navigate the danger zone, advancing beyond the second tree line is nearly insurmountable. Recognizing the threat of Russian demoning gear, Ukrainian forces have prioritized its destruction, with several pieces confirmed destroyed in HIMARS strikes. A captured Russian soldier revealed that in the absence of UR-77, tanks fitted with minesweepers were used instead. Despite his warnings about the adverse weather and terrain, his unit was dispatched, leading to the tank getting mired in mud and the decimation of the entire assault group. Recently, Russians resumed employing kamikaze vehicles, packing them with explosives and aiming them at Ukrainian positions. This method is highly risky, with little chance of success. Even when these explosions clear minefields, Ukrainian forces reportedly remine the area using RAM shells for distant deployment. Based on the geolocated footage released over recent months, it has been verified that Russian forces have failed to progress past the initial 3 lines seized during the early stages of the offensive. Should the Ukrainians persist in closely monitoring the region and sustaining a dense minefield presence, the likelihood of any Russian advancement appears to be almost nil.